Buongiorno. In my quest for baking traditional dishes from around the world, I've always been intrigued with the baked portion of a tiramisu, the ladyfingers. Now, tiramisu is not a baked dish unless you make your own ladyfingers, which can be difficult to find in the grocery store, so you might need to make your own if you want this dessert. Today's bake focuses on traditional homemade ladyfingers that I have come to love. We are making this entire recipe from scratch. However, you can totally buy your ladyfingers from the store or order them online. You'll need eggs, superfine granulated sugar, vanilla, lemon zest, which is optional, cake flour, potato starch, salt, and powdered sugar for the ladyfinger tops. We're starting by making the Savoiardi, also known as ladyfingers. The name Savoiardi comes from the Duchy of Savoy, an area that covered part of France and Italy during the 15th century. They were considered royal cookies. The key in getting this recipe right is prepping all the ingredients before you begin whipping the egg whites. You should not have any pauses from the time you begin whipping the egg whites until you put the cookies in the oven. Any breaks in time will allow the egg whites to deflate and the cookies to flatten out. So to get started, we want to go ahead and preheat our oven to 375 degrees and make sure that you have two oven grates sort of in the center of the oven, because you're likely going to need both because we have two cookie sheets that we're going to put in the oven. Then you need to prep your cookie sheets. So you need two cookie sheets on which you place parchment paper. And then we're going to put these in the refrigerator. We want them cold when we put our ladyfingers on them, because ladyfingers are so light, they're not dense at all, they're likely to spread. So if our cookie sheets are cold, it'll prevent those ladyfingers from spreading too much when we place them in the oven. So cookie sheets in the refrigerator. Let's measure out all of our ingredients and put them aside so that we can easily access them when we need them. I'm using a food scale, as weighing and baking is much more accurate than using cups. First, we're going to measure out 60 grams of superfine sugar. And we need to separate it because it's 120 grams of sugar total, but we're going to put half of it in with the egg whites and half with the egg yolks. So 60 grams in each bowl. And I am using superfine sugar here. So if you can't find superfine sugar in your grocery store, then you can simply just whiz up your regular granulated sugar in a food processor. Just make sure you whiz it up until it's really, really fine. And we don't want powdered sugar fine, but we want really fine granules. And this is soft. This is a really soft, thin sugar. The reason we're using superfine sugar is because it dissolves more easily when you mix it with the egg whites and egg yolks, and we want that sugar to dissolve. We don't want granules in those two ingredients. Okay, I'm going to set my 260 grams of sugar aside, and we're going to zest a lemon, a whole large lemon. You don't have to put lemon in your cookies, but if you're making a trifle or some sort of dish with the cookies where you have some fresh fruit, like in our strawberry tiramisu, then it's nice to have that little bit of freshness from the lemon in the cookie, because the cookies are very simple. They don't have a ton of flavor. They're very light. They're very airy. And so if we can add a little bit of extra flavor to them, it just makes them that much more satisfying, right? And tasty. But if I were making, say, the traditional coffee and cocoa tiramisu, I might leave the lemon out of my cookies, but it's not to say that it wouldn't taste good with the lemon in them. Optional, but I'm using it for this recipe. You don't have to. So get that ready to go, set it aside. So now we're going to add the dry ingredients that we're going to sift in after we whip up the egg whites and they've been incorporated with the egg yolks. So for this, it's 3 ingredients we're going to put in a bowl. And we're going to start with 80 grams of cake flour. 80 grams of cake flour is like 3/4 of a cup. Cake flour is great for this recipe because in traditional Italian tiramisu ladyfingers, the Italians use what they call 0-0 flour, and 0-0 flour is a very light flour, and the comparable version of that in the United States is like maybe a combination of cake and pastry flour, but I find that cake flour works just fine in this recipe, so that's the type of flour that I'm using and that I recommend. We're actually going to mix it with some potato starch. Now, potato starch is very fine. It keeps the cookies light and fluffy. Now we're going to add 40 grams of potato starch, which is about 1/3 cup. Starch is great because it absorbs the liquid in foods that maybe you don't want to have as much liquid, and we want our cookies to dry out before we put them in our tiramisu dish. So to do that, we're gonna rely on the potato starch to help dry those cookies out and absorb some of that extra moisture. Okay, so now we're gonna add a 1/2 teaspoon of sifted salt. And I actually just sifted my salt in a little sifter. And I have exactly a 1/2 teaspoon right here. So I'm just gonna add that to the mixture. And we're just gonna set this aside, and I'm gonna sift it in the eggs when I'm ready to put it in the eggs. But for now, we're just gonna put it aside. The last prep that we need to do is our piping bag. I don't have a piping bag, so I'm just using a gallon-sized bag and a large glass to be able to provide stability as I put the batter into the bag. Place the corner of the bag into the bottom of your glass and then fold the rest of the bag over it. And then make sure you've got enough space to start pouring in your batter, because that batter is going to be thick and fluffy and we're going to have to kind of push it down in there. So try to have as much space as you can. Have scissors nearby so that when you're ready to cut the piping bag, you don't have to run around your house looking for a pair of scissors. Just have them ready to go. All right, these are our ingredients. They're set and ready. Now let's start whipping up the eggs. For this portion, we're going to separate the egg yolks from the egg whites. And you want cold eggs for this. Again, we want our ingredients to be cold in this recipe because we don't want the ladyfingers to flatten out in the oven. And so we're gonna place our 4 egg yolks in a large bowl, and our egg whites are gonna go into a stand mixer. Now, if you do not have a stand mixer, you can mix everything up with your hand mixer, or maybe by hand using a large balloon whisk. It's a lot more work, but it's up to you, whatever you have access to. And I like to separate mine in a bowl because recently when I was making, I think it was the macaron recipe, I decided to crack all my eggs in the same bowl, and guess what? I cracked my yolk. And so I had to start from scratch, and I had to use those eggs for making scrambled eggs for dinner or something. So it's easiest if you can separate them in a bowl, and that way you don't accidentally waste 3 or 4 eggs when you're trying to separate your yolks from your whites. While our egg whites hang out in the mixer with the whisk attachment for a moment, we're going to whip up the egg yolks, and we're going to add 1 of those 60 grams of sugar that we weighed out earlier. And we are just going to whisk the sugar with the egg yolks until they are pale and fluffy. We're going to add a teaspoon of vanilla to this. We're also going to add the lemon zest that we've already zested. Again, if you don't want to add lemon zest to yours, you don't have to. This is strictly an optional flavoring. I like it, so I'm adding it. Mix it all up. All right, that part's done. We're just gonna let it hang out and set it aside. We have 4 egg whites in our mixer. You could use a hand mixer instead of a stand mixer if that's what you have. We're gonna whip this to soft peaks, and then we're gonna add the other 60 grams of sugar. I'm gonna whip mine on speed 4 to 6. Start out slow and get faster as you go. And we've got some soft peaks going on now in our egg whites. So now we're going to add slowly our 60 grams of sugar. This is the other 60 grams that we prepared. We're going to continue to let this whip up until our egg whites are at stiff peaks. So our whites are at stiff peaks. You could tell because when you move your whisk down, up and down from the inside, you'll see the peaks that are trailed or left behind are sticking straight up. Another way you could tell, so visible, but also look how much of a mass of egg whites we have in our whisk, and it's not oozing down, so we know that it's ready. I'm gonna do 1 more quick whirl of the mixer for the egg yolks, just to make sure they're all mixed up, because we don't want too much to settle down below. Now this needs to all happen fairly quickly because we don't want any pauses or breaks from the time that we add our egg whites until we put them in the oven. Using a spatula, we're just going to place the egg whites into the yolk mixture, all of them. We want to minimize as much deflation after we've whipped up all this wonderful air into our egg whites. So we're just going to fold. Folding is more like a figure 8 pattern. So we're going to cut in the center, go around, all the way around, then cut in the center, and then just sort of fold the egg yolks, making sure the egg yolks are getting into a lot of the egg whites, just being careful not to over mix because we do not want that air to disappear. It looks like we're mostly incorporating. Notice that was just a few turns, not too many at all. Now we're going to sift in the cake flour, the salt, and the potato starch. Notice how easily and quickly that sifts in because both the starch and the flour very light. Whatever's left over, just discard. Okay, we're gonna do the last bit of folding in to incorporate that flour mixture with our egg mixture. Again, careful not to deflate or make a huge mess by, letting all your ingredients fly out of the bowl. This is ready to go. Notice I do have a little bit of white specks. Once this goes in the oven, you're not gonna be able to see any white specks when it's cooked. I don't wanna over whip this. I think this is totally fine as is, and you won't even see those white specks. So now, we got to prepare our piping bag. Let it fall into your piping bag. We're going to put all of it in here, and it will fill this whole cup and most of this bag. All right, go ahead and grab your cookie sheet. We're going to trim off about 3/4 inches wide of this corner, and I'm just going to eyeball it. I've done this enough, have a pretty good idea what that looks like. Squeeze the top of your bag, grab that little corner so that the batter doesn't ooze out. We're gonna pipe about 4 inches of a ladyfinger. Looks like a finger, right? So I have it sort of measured on mine. I've got little marks on my paper that are already there, the parchment paper, so I know about how my 4 inches are gonna look like. So you're just gonna pipe a steady stream of a ladyfinger about 4 inches. Have about an inch space in between each one, so that when they do rise, they shouldn't touch. I'm going to place this in the refrigerator like this while I finish putting the toppings on it, and then we'll take the batter back out and add to the other cookie sheet. For the toppings, we're going to sprinkle over the ladyfingers some granulated sugar, and this does not have to be super fine. I'm actually using cane sugar for this because I like the little coarser granules. On the top of that, we're going to sprinkle over some powdered sugar, but I'm going to use a sifter. And as soon as I finish this is going to go straight to the oven because we do not want it to set out so that it warms and starts to spread. Okay, that's it. First batch of ladyfingers done. In the oven it goes for 14 to 15 minutes. All right, we're going to do the second cookie sheet here. Same as before, 4 to 5 inches. This cookie sheet is a 17 by 12, and I could get 15 finger cookies on a cookie sheet. So that's gonna make 30 cookies or so that we have right now on a cookie sheet, and I have a little batter left over. And I will place that batter on what's left on a separate little cookie sheet and just bake it separately. I'm gonna add this pan to the oven and bake it also for 14 to 15 minutes until they are brown on the sides and starting to brown on the tops. All right, check it. Our ladyfingers are out of the oven. They are cooked, baked, and they are done. Now it's we need to let them cool. Notice how brown they are on the top, just a slight golden brown. We'll look at the underside of one. Notice how brown it is. In fact, for fun, let's break into one so you can see what the inside looks like. We'll pick this one over here because it's not as pretty. All right, I don't know if you could see, notice how airy it is on the inside because remember this is mostly whipped egg whites with some egg yolk and then a little bit of flour. That's a great light, airy cookie, perfect to soaking up liquids for a tiramisu or any other dessert that you want to make in sort of a trifle. Allow the ladyfingers to cool completely. If making a tiramisu or other layered dessert, leave the ladyfingers on the counter uncovered for at least 1 day before storing. Ladyfingers are meant to harden, particularly for tiramisu where they soak up a liquid. They are fabulous by themselves, dunked in coffee or chocolate, dipped in sweet cream or chocolate spread, or used in a trifle. You could store them in an airtight container at room temperature for a couple of weeks. They can also be frozen for up to a couple of months. So if you know you want to make a tiramisu over the next month, make these ahead of time. Let them sit on the counter for a day, store them in the freezer, and take them out the day that you want to make your tiramisu, and you're ready to go. Thanks for watching. I hope you gained some useful tips today. If nothing else, I hope you've been inspired. Until next time, cuocere il mondo.